Welcome to Press Coverage. I'm Theo Gremminger, and today I am joined by two guys who are very, very sharp with their fantasy football takes, but when it comes to actually being fantasy football players, as the young kids would say, these two are about that life. These guys are playing in a ton of leagues, having a ton of money invested in fantasy football all summer long. If I want to track down Mike Schopp or Adam Krautwurst, they're easy to find. I'm going to find them in a draft room. And this summer, we got together on the Dominator, Billy Muzio's show for crossover week here at Player Profiler. And we really got after it. It was a great show. So I've been looking forward to, chopping it up with Mike and Adam for quite some time. And we were able to work this one out. And it's actually fortuitous to get these guys on this week because there's a lot to talk about with the Buffalo Bills. And Mike is my go-to expert. I think Mike, when it comes to Buffalo Bills, voices throughout the country, I think yours is the best one. And I think most people in fantasy football would agree with me on that. And Adam is one of the sharpest high stakes players in the entire country. So these two guys co-host the Deep End podcast, which is a show that's been a regular listen for me for quite some time. It's a really, really good show. I highly recommend that. But I'm just curious, how did that show come to be? Because Mike, you've been a sports radio guy. Adam, you've been a high stakes player. How did you guys come to be where you're doing a podcast together? And when did it start up? Maybe start with Mike on this one.
Yeah, I think it's our fourth year, and Adam looked me up. It's my path into fantasy football is hilarious, and I've been very lucky how certain random events happen. And Adam had just come off winning top 5 in the main event and wanted to do a podcast. Do I have this all wrong, maybe, Adam? I think this is right. We were with Draft Sharks at the time.
Yeah.
And, I knew fantasy, but not as well as I do now, I think. But, with my radio experience, maybe we're a good fit. So, yeah, that's how I remember it, Adam.
Yeah. I didn't know Mike was into fantasy until I saw him in the Pros versus Joes. And I looked him up and we hit it off, and the rest is history. Now he's, 6 figures deep in fantasy football every year, and he hates me for it.
That's right. That's right. But he's not going to hate you for it when he takes down a main event.
That's true.
Or it's inevitable that you two guys are going to take down a couple of big leagues, as I'm sure you're in the contention for in some of your leagues right now. We've competed against one another. We've also, just talked a lot of fantasy football. Mike, why don't you share with everybody? Because I think that there's like 2 groups of people that know you. There's the groups of people in the high stakes fantasy who really know you for now you being a high stakes fantasy player, but you also are on WGR 550 in Buffalo. And why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's my career is hosting with my partner, the Bulldog, Chris Parker, weekday afternoon sports talk show on Buffalo's sports station, home of the Bills and Sabres. I've been at WGR since 2002 in the same time slot, which is a long time for radio, for local radio, and I'm very proud of that. And yeah, I got into fantasy, pretty seriously, maybe 7 years ago, something like that. I definitely talk a lot of fantasy, maybe too much on my weekday show, but try to do it in a way that's, it's really just talking ball, right? Like you're talking about players and predicting games, everything like that we obsess over in here, and try to make that relatable for people. So yeah, it's been a pretty good run.
Yeah, no, for sure, and highly recommend people check out Mike's work. When it's specific to the Buffalo Bills, but I think that like tying in the fantasy, like that's what's bringing a lot of people in there. Like, would there be this much talk about Khalil Shakir this week if it wasn't for his performance last week? Like these things kind of all tie together. And now you have young kids even playing fantasy. Like I know a bunch of my kids are a little too young, but there's like 10, 12-year-olds in my town that get together and do fantasy drafts. I think it's just amazing. Pretty much everybody kind of understands fantasy, and it's growing and growing and growing. Adam, you're with Full-Time Fantasy this year. Why don't you let everybody know kind of what you're doing with them? Adam's been a very successful high-stakes player for a long time, and now you're doing even a little more content than you were before.
Yeah, I do a weekly podcast Wednesday nights, just kind of recapping it's kind of storylines from the previous week, and then going into like a bunch of start sits for the upcoming week. And then I write a start sit article every week for them over at Full Time. And I try to with the article, I try to avoid like a lot of the easier ones, or the ones that like, hey, start this guy who's in the top 12. I try to dig a little bit deeper, so it's a little bit harder, but I hopefully it's a little bit more helpful.
Yeah, I write the sleepers article here at Player Profiler as well. It's like a labor of love looking for those guys that are like very readily available. But hey, Adam, it's a fun week for that, man. We got Demario Douglas. We're completely changing the narrative on Royce Freeman. I'd like every podcast to refer to him as Rolls Royce for now on, and we're gonna have like a career renaissance. But guys, you guys draft all summer. Mike, you were doing underdog drafts literally every second of the day. Adam, I could find you in a three. Adam, your 350s were like, you're like living in those 350s every single night. On multiple formats. But we take a long time with our process. We identify our ADP targets, and then we get 8 weeks of sample size, and a lot of it's completely changed. Some of them were big time hits, some of them were disappointments. But when you get to your biggest positive surprise for the season, who's that guy that, you've really been impressed with the way they've played, or really been impressed with their usage? Why don't you take this one, Mike?
It has to be Adam Thielen. That's a guy many of us just ignored all summer. And there's so much unknown, but you try to, in those summer drafts, get a little weird if you can in the late rounds. Thinking of the Patriots, you mentioned Douglas already. I drafted Tyquan Thornton a lot, but make sure you get Kayshon Boutte or Davante Parker, and whatever. Like you still don't know what you're going to see. Thielen, I mean, what a renaissance for him this year, and a huge get if you have him on teams. They changed who's calling the plays in Carolina for last week, but it didn't stop Thielen. There seems to be no other reliable option on that team. You've got a rookie quarterback trying to learn. So what a win for anybody who picked him, Thielen.
What a great call, Mike. And it's funny because, like, Adam, you come up with your own process for guys, but when you're in these really sharp drafts, you're also noticing where like the really sharp money's going on a couple of these guys. And people were really taking Jonathan Mingo as we got to late in the summer. So I was like, I got to play a little catch up here with little Jonathan Mingo. And I felt like I was, pretty sharp with Mingo. There was also some guys on DJ Shark, and Adam Thielen was just sitting there. And a lot of people just completely brushed that one aside. That's one we're going to have to revisit in the offseason, and really look at how this was kind of missed, because he was healthy and the opportunity was there, and a young quarterback has basically had tunnel vision for him all season long. How about you, Adam? Who's the guy that was a big positive surprise for you?
Yeah, we're real quick on Adam Thielen, because he's a guy that I was on. He's a guy that has been a pleasant surprise for me as well. Mike stole that one from me. But I think it's all narrative street with Thielen. It's like, hey, he's a coach on the field. He's an older guy going into the slot. The young quarterback can rely on him. All that type of thing. So I don't know if we can learn a ton from that, except for maybe like older receivers, Bolden, Fitzgerald, a couple others. When they go into the slot, they can still succeed. Speaking of older receivers, one of my kind of pleasant surprises, a guy that I didn't have as much as I normally do, but Hall of Famer Mike Evans. He's been really kind of consistent for them. Wide receiver 14 on the season, well ahead of where his ADP was. Questions about Baker Mayfield there, and he's just, is he older? Are they going to trade him? That type of thing. And he's just been week in, week out consistent. Didn't have a good game last week or 2 weeks ago against the Bills. Still gets in the end zone, still finds the end zone. So I think he's been like a consistent guy that, you can plug in there as a low end wide receiver 1 or high end wide receiver 2 that maybe some people are kind of given up on already.
Yeah, it's funny because we've seen this every single year. And I talk about the money zone for wide receivers during the summer, these guys that are like the very end of the wide receiver 2 all the way to the wide receiver 4. And every single year we see these veterans hit out of this zone. It was Brandon Cooks 2 seasons ago. Last year it was Amari Cooper and Tyler Lockett. And then this year it's like, I see that happening, but I'm not going to take Mike Evans. And Mike Evans was kind of a guy where you would kind of shrug your shoulders in some of these leagues where there was like a deep wide receiver runs, and you'd say, I guess I'm going to take Mike Evans because it's like the end of a tier, and it's like found money. So I think that's another thing we need to revisit in the offseason is veterans that have produced big time in fantasy football. They get kind of beat up because we're a little scared of their quarterback situation. But I think a lot of these guys are a little bit quarterback averse in the sense that they're going to get the targets, they're going to get the usage, and the production will be there. How about Mike, a guy that you were high on, or you just thought that was going to be a good fantasy player this year that's been a major disappointment for you?
Well, I'll say Jahan Dotson, but maybe that's about to turn around. I don't know. Like the key there might be Curtis Samuel's injury. And whereas like I'm not beating myself up too much over not drafting Thielen more. Good for Adam that he was doing that, because, a lot of those summer drafts, you really do sort of lean toward rookies for late season for the big money. And, that doesn't have to, we're not sure that's wrong yet. We're still only halfway through. That I do sort of get into myself a little bit about Dotson because Eric Bieniemy always spread the ball around to lots of different targets with Kansas City, and Washington is doing that. So, McLaurin has been okay, but Dotson he got to a point where he was really not startable. And, he had a great day on everybody's bench last week. We'll see if that changes. So that's a guy I was really into this year, and it's not gone well. Maybe it turns around.
Yeah, the unknown upside drafter really got jammed with the Jahan Dotson. And I think that's the kind of profile that a lot of times we look for. And when it starts to flash, we really get excited about it because second-year wide receivers are cheat code. We saw Jahan Dotson score the outsized number of touchdowns. He had the first-round draft pick pedigree, and it's really burned a lot of people, especially when the time period in the summer, Mike, where you were probably drafting a lot of them, was when McLaurin had the injury concern, and he steamed up in FFPC, FFWC, and FFC drafts where he was like a fifth-round pick in some of those wide receiver premium formats, sixth-round pick in FFPC. So that was a tough one. But like you said, there's a whole second half of the season. So a lot of those 2-6 Jahan Dotson teams, you still have hope. Let's go. We'll get it going. How about you, Adam? Who's a guy that you're disappointed with? And I'll say you can't talk about Aaron Rodgers being injured as your disappointment because I'm Team Garrett Wilson with you, but it's still happening, man. Garrett Wilson is still happening, Adam. We got a whole half season for him to get in wide receiver one land.
That's right. No, Garrett, that's certainly disappointing. For me, I'm gonna dig a little bit deeper. I'm gonna go with a guy for me is Elijah Moore. He was a guy that I thought getting out of New York, the talent that people said he had, talent that I think that he has. He hasn't been hurt, and to be on a Cleveland team that we thought would be a little bit more pass heavy, it just hasn't happened for him. One red zone target. I mean, he's still getting the 20% target share that we would have hoped for, but one end zone target, yards per catch, like 9.5. Like, it's just not, there's nothing downfield for him. I think it was week 2 where they targeted him. It was a primetime game. I forget who it was. They targeted him like 12 times, and everything was like a sideline toe tapper, and it was high, and it was all this other stuff. It just hasn't clicked for him. And then the injury with the quarterback, obviously the situation there with Watson certainly doesn't make it any better. So I was hoping for a breakout year here for Elijah Moore. And a lot of people talk about too, one of the things is like, running backs get hurt more, which is true, which is why a lot of times receivers go higher. But for receivers, there's a dual injury situation that you have to worry about, like Garrett Wilson. Like, you have to hope Garrett Wilson stays healthy and Aaron Rodgers stays healthy. So the Elijah Moore, the same thing. Watson not being healthy, I think, is certainly hurting him. And that's kind of like a double whammy that you have to do with kind of all of these receivers is, the Bengals receivers weren't doing that well without Joe Burrow, and the list goes on and on. So that's kind of something that I'm going to start to take into account more when I think about taking these receivers a little bit higher.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting offseason. I'd love to get together with you guys and kind of talk about like the lessons we've learned when we get to there. But Elijah Moore starts steaming up again during the summer. So like, if you took him in the 11th round, you wouldn't really be worrying about it. But you ended up seeing Elijah Moore start creeping into the 7th round and then kind of settles into the 8th. where there was a number of guys that have hit. If you would have simply gone running back in that range instead of Elijah Moore, you would have been feeling, really good about things. So let's take a quick question from the chat, because we're going to talk some lineup decisions in this podcast. Jay Wimmers, good morning. I need one for PPR flex. Josh Downs, and Josh Downs might not play. He's banged up. Rashid Shaheed, who's going up against a very soft Chicago secondary. Wan'Dale Robinson, who could conceivably see a volume bump with no Darren Waller, or your top 5 running back, Zach Moss. Which way are you going? Start with Mike.
I would play Downs if he's active, or else Wan'Dale Robinson. Robinson's in an interesting spot with Daniel Jones coming back. I feel like that offense will start. The offensive line is healthier. Finally, I feel like they're going to start to look better. And so Waller out. I kind of like Robinson second half. Downs has been great, and Moss is a good name for the first question, like biggest surprise of the season. I just got to think logically that the Colts end up going more with Jonathan Taylor. Taylor was hurt maybe also last week. Didn't really play very much in the second half, so that could get you to Moss.
I love these lineup decisions, because I definitely would have gone with Shaheed or Moss. Curious what you're going with, Adam.
Yeah, I think if you need like a ton of points, I think Shaheed is probably the play, because he's either 30 or nothing. But I do lean Moss here, and it's just because I just don't. Coaches, once they get here, wherever here is, once they get here with these players, the Montgomerys and the Gibbses, like once they just don't go back until there's an injury. And so Carolina is the best, gives up the most fantasy points right now to running backs. So I think Indianapolis is going to run the heck out of the ball. That game shouldn't get like out of hand for them, for Indy, where they have to throw to catch up. So I just like Moss is a safe, probably like 15 points.
No, I love it. I'm going Moss as well. I think they don't have enough horses in Indianapolis that they're going to be able to get away from Moss. You talk about Michael Pittman's getting as much as he can handle. Josh Downs is playing very, very well. Taylor is going to get a lot, but Zach Moss getting 10 plus touches every single week with a little bit of work in the receiving game is going to be enough
goal
to
line carries too. He's getting goal line
and
carries
goal line carries. And Shane Steichen continues to sing his praises. So, for better, for worse. And, it's funny because Mike, you were obviously around Zach Moss and Zach Moss being a Buffalo Bill, but I think people think of him as this older guy. He's only 25 years old. He's got a lot of juice left in the tank. So we're going to get to a lot more of these situations. We're going to look at some of the big games this week and help you out with your lineup decisions right after we hear from a word from our sponsors.
Hey, we're all starting new fantasy leagues all the time. And more often than not, where do we start our fantasy leagues at Player Profiler? On Sleeper. Because it's the best. You can imagine my excitement when I saw Sleeper rolled out. Sleeper picks, baby. And game stacking is the path to positive returns with these pick'em games. Find that sneaky shootout and set most of the players to go over their projection for that week. Or you find a game going to get dragged into the mud and take every member of the passing game for less than their projections that week. And if you pick up to 8, that's how you 100x your payout on Sleeper. It's called the Hail Mary. So if you use promo code Underworld, you get a $100 instant deposit match. Check out Sleeper's terms and conditions for details. These Sleeper picks are live in over 25 states. Yeah, buddy.
Welcome back to Press Coverage. I'm Theo Gremminger, and I'm joined today by Mike Schopp and Adam Krautwurst, the co-hosts of The Deep End. And guys, we talked a little bit about our disappointments, a little bit of our surprises. Now let's get into talking a little bit of Buffalo Bills, because this past week, you heard that Leonard Fournette was signing with Buffalo, and he ended up signing with him. This was a player that saw a kind of a mixed range in terms of the fab money spent on the waiver wire for him across these high stakes leagues. But it's a player that I'm pretty excited about. I'm curious how you guys see Leonard Fournette fitting into the Buffalo offense, and also his effect on James Cook. James Cook was a guy that has had some mixed success this season, but has been, for the most part, a locked-in fantasy starter pretty much everywhere. Let's start with Mike on this one. Were you surprised by Fournette landing with Buffalo? and your expectations for him and the backfield moving forward.
Not really surprised once Damian Harris went out that they would go get somebody else. It was Ty Johnson as well. Khalil Shakir is handling returns, Deontay Hardy. So I get it. I do think the Bills could end up, turning to Fournette to some significant role. And that wouldn't be good for Cook. It couldn't be good for Cook. I mean, Cook is also not a big guy, and Fournette is. Latavius Murray has been goal line pass protection guy, and Fournette, I predict, will be an upgrade over Murray, who has just not been effective at all, goal line running. And Fournette has a good reputation not only for pass protection, but for pass receiving. So I think he might end up being interesting here. I've been happy to bid on him in waivers this week. I don't know if he'll play this week. I can't imagine even if he's active using him this week, but I think there's a chance that he is relevant here down the stretch.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I think that he's definitely the best goal line back on the team. And he's going to cut into James Cook's role as a receiver, which is really limits Cook. Adam, how are you seeing this? Were you able to add any Fournette this week on the waiver wire? Did you have some Fournette stashed?
I did have some Fournette stashed. I think Mike and I picked them up in maybe our main event too, to get a piece of that. I think Josh Allen is probably the best goal line back on the team, but they refuse to. They would rather turn around and go 5 yards backwards and hand it to Latavius Murray. And now Leonard Fournette. I think that for Cook, best case scenario is that nothing changes. That Leonard Fournette is Latavius Murray and does all the same things he does, and Cook still gets the work he's been getting, which, if you drafted him where you were getting him, you're still happy. I mean, RB16, I think, PPR on the season, which is higher than I would have had him going, but still he's not the goal line back. They don't throw enough to the running backs, but man, this schedule coming up, I mean, Mike probably knows better than I do. You got Cincinnati, you have the Chiefs, you got Philly, you got Dallas, you got the Chargers. I mean, they're going to have to throw in these games. So maybe Cook does get a little bit more, but I think it's more likely that he does take a little bit of a hit because of Fournette's pass catching chops. I think Fournette, even though he's the bigger back, he might be their third down back because he blocks better. I get, the big knock is that Cook is a horrible pass blocker. And so you get Fournette out there as a great pass blocker and can catch. There might be roles reversed of what people think they should be, but I still think you're going to be okay with Cook if you've been fine with what he's been doing so far.
Yeah, I just think for me, it really limits his upside. I think your roster construction probably means that James Cook is a fantasy starter for you for the rest of the season, even if that means he becomes like a 60% guy, which he kind of was with Lat Murray. But now you're actually going to see that the danger zone becomes that he gets the kind of the empty calorie touches and Fournette's getting the receptions and the goal line works. And then you're looking at more of an RB3. So it's a mess. And Mike, it's like our summer debate just pivots, because Mike and I talked during the summer about James Cook versus Damian Harris at length. It was a really fun one. Let's take a quick question for the chat, and then we're going to get back to the Bills. Here's a real gross one, and this is why we bring on Mike and Adam, because this one, if you're listening on the pod, you don't have to look at it, but if you're watching on YouTube, Clayton Tune or Brett Rypien in the Superflex. This is this tough one, really tough one. I'm going to go with Brett Rypien, the veteran. Mike's on Brett.
Too.
Adam?
I would if he starts because Tune at Cleveland.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's Green Bay for Rypien is a lot more forgiving than that Cleveland defense. But Adam, talk up your boy Clayton Tune.
No way.
Yes.
I'm going to go Rypien too, even though it makes me sick to say. I mean, it's funny listening to people talk about, all the podcasts listening during the week, like being a Bills fan, like his uncle destroyed us in the Super Bowl in 1992 or whatever it was. That's all I can think about. And no one is talking about that he comes from a lineage of NFL quarterbacks. So I'm going to go with Rypien.
I'll give you a Mark Rypien story. I was a young boy growing up in Washington, D.C., and we went to Dulles Airport to pick up somebody at the airport. I think it was maybe picking up my mother from the airport or picking up an uncle or something. And we go to get a bite to eat at the Marriott next to Dulles Airport. And it's the entire Washington Redskins team for some team function. And I'm like, my jaw drops. These are the guys I watch on TV. And I got to meet a number of them. and Mark Rypein took 2 minutes, took a bunch of pictures with, me and my sister and all this kind of stuff, signed an autograph. So, shout out, I'm sorry about your Buffalo Bills, but that was a legendary Washington team. And it is kind of cool that they're related. Let's get back to the Bills though, because my guy, Dalton Kincaid, is starting to really, really come on. Back-to-back weeks of looking like the real deal. He catches a touchdown the last week. The week before, he catches 8 passes. We have him. I mean, well, pretty much everybody at this point has him around tight end 5 in Dynasty, locked in. You guys got a real one. How do you feel we should treat him for the rest of the season? Is this a guy that can challenge for tight end, top 5 tight end numbers, or should we temper expectations and he's more of a, weekly starter, but a low end tight end 1? Start with you, Adam.
I love Kincaid in rest of the season and in Dynasty. I feel bad because maybe 4 weeks ago, I was telling people in non-tight end premium, you can go ahead and drop him. He's the second tight end. They're not really using him. And then Knox gets hurt. He's got the best tight end schedule remaining the rest of the season. His next 3 weeks are the best schedule of the next 3 weeks. Cincy, Denver, the Jets, as far as tight ends. And he's got it all to himself. I really, really like him. Tight end top 5 in Dynasty. He might be, I don't know, top 3 for me in Dynasty with who he's attached to, Josh Allen, for the next 10 years. He looks the part, right? He looks what we all thought and hoped he would look like: athletic, fluid, all that type of stuff. What does concern me a tiny bit is his touchdown this last week it didn't look like it was he was the main target. Josh rolls out and kind of finds him in open space. I'd like to see them target a little bit more to him down inside the 10, inside the 15. But yeah, you can't help but be excited about him.
You got to love it, right, Mike? You got to love Kincaid's season.
Yeah, I mean, I remember how excited about him you were in the summer. It looks like it's set up really well for him. The thing about the tight end matchups are interesting to consider because he doesn't really play tight end. So it's more of a slot receiver kind of role. And also, it will be interesting to see if the Bills choose to revert to the 2 tight end personnel, the 12 personnel, like they call it, when Knox is available. Knox has been a real cog in their offense. He's never commanded many targets, but he's mattered, and they paid him accordingly. So I doubt Knox disappears here. And if he is on the field, what will that mean? Different matchups will bring, like always, bring about different game plans and such. But they were maybe forced a little bit against Tampa Bay into the spread look. They ran no huddle. It was very different, which was great for Kincaid. It was great for Gabe Davis. It was great for Shakir. And, I'm pretty sure Bills fans want to see more of that.
Let's stay on Shakir because I think he's interesting. You bring up the fact that they're spreading him out. We saw a lot more 11 personnel from Buffalo. And am I crazy? Does it look better, Adam? Having Shakir involved at the beginning of the year, first of all, there was a logjam for the wide receiver 3. Then you had the fact that they were in, 2 tight end sets with Knox and Kincaid at times. Now, Shakir at least has a temporary path towards viability. Last week has 6 catches, goes over 90 yards receiving. I picked him up in a number of places this week, and I feel like in some leagues I was kind of bidding against myself, but he had an 18% target share, played in 65% of the snaps. I think that in a lot of leagues that he's sitting out there as a free agent, he's going to be a waiver wire ad this week because I could see him having another 4 or 5 catches, another plus 65-yard receiving game against Cincinnati. Your thoughts on Shakir, Adam?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The offense just looked much better. I mean, he's just Shakir as a receiver. He's nothing special, but he's just better than Knox is as a receiving threat in every way. I mean, his hands are better. He's fast. He's a receiver. He should be. But I think the offense looks better too when you're instead of checking down to Knox, you're checking down to Shakir. And I will point out and then hopefully too, that keeps Kincaid at that tight end spot. Mike's absolutely right. If Kincaid's playing slot, you can kind of throw the tight end numbers away. But if we've got Shakir on the field and Kincaid playing tight end, that's kind of what you want. And last year in the playoff game against Cincinnati, I think the only passing touchdown was to Cole Beasley in that game. So maybe you get Shakir in the slot, you get a heavy dose of that slot position against the Bengals this week.
Mike, anything to add on Shakir?
Just I think consider all that and then back to Fournette, because if that's their personnel grouping, Fournette is the running back. If he's still Fournette, which is whatever that's worth, he's the running back I'd want on the field. He's checked down, he's pass protection. You can't have a tight end get run over by a pass rusher all the time, and that's not where you want Kincaid to be living. So Fournette or Murray, but I think Fournette sort of fits in well there.
At the very least, like, the narrative that Fournette wasn't signing with an NFL team because he's out of shape was one of the silliest things that you could have seen when you actually saw him yesterday at practice, and he looked leaner than we've seen him in years. The guy looked like considerably, yoked up and kind of ready to rock. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm excited about Fournette. We'll see how this thing goes. You really don't know until we actually see it on the field, but at the very least, a big improvement over a 33-year-old Latavius Murray. Here's from the chat, and this is going to make a lot of you angry to read this sort of a question. Shout out to Aaron Waldo in the chat. Which two would you play out of Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson, and DJ Moore? All strong wide receivers here. Adam, we got to eliminate one of them.
Oh man. I would probably play Puka and get Garrett Wilson. I just think Puka's just so involved in that offense, and Garrett Wilson, obviously the man there. So I would go with Puka. Green Bay just traded to the Bills, one of their top corners. Obviously there's a quarterback situation there for the Rams, but I just trust Puka, and obviously Garrett Wilson's my guy.
Mike, which one are you? Same?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I mean, Tyson Bagent, that's not really happening. So I would, all three of those receivers are in quarterback quandaries, I guess. But I'd also start Nacua and Wilson there.
Here's a fun question from the chat. This is half-point PPR. My guy, Demario Douglas, Josh Downs, who's also my guy, and Khalil Shakir, half-point PPR. And I'm guessing we're picking one of them based on the question. I'm going to say for me, it's Josh Downs if he plays, and then I would probably go Demario Douglas as my second pick because I think he's going to be like a wide receiver 3 this week. Which way would you go? Start with you, Mike.
Same. Douglas is interesting. Like they're down receivers, and it's Washington this week. So yeah, I trust that. I don't know. I'm not yet to the Shakir level, the Adams level of trust on Shakir, maybe, or just sort of like that level of confidence there, because we've seen Deontay Hardy, they've got Sherfield. I mean, just I don't know if I want to trust that too much. Let's see if he can sort of, we see the usage kind of repeat before I'd want to start Shakir.
Adam, anything to add? Douglas, Downs, or Shakir, half-point PPR?
Yeah, obviously, if Downs plays, it would be Downs and then Douglas for me. Douglas is intriguing with all the injuries they have there now. I mean, if he slides right into that role, he could be a smash, not a smash, like a wide receiver 3 rest of the season.
Shout out to Tyler Knabel in the chat. He's talking up his guy, Taylor Heineke. Heineke had 4 top 15 performances last week, top 15 weekly performances as the quarterback in Washington, won a number of games. Do you have any hope for him in Atlanta? At least the ADOT was higher. He's attempting to push the ball downfield. No Drake London, but does Heineke excite you more than Ritter, Adam?
Absolutely. I think there's another guy. Mike, did we pick up Heineke in that one league this week? Do we have to,
yes.
might have to start him? Yeah. We wanted Levis. I think we ended up getting Heineke. I'm excited about, this is crazy to say, I'm kind of excited about Heineke there with all those weapons. I mean, you still have to deal with the coach, but with all those weapons there, Minnesota's kind of reeling, with Heineke, I get like the Gardner Minshew vibes, right? Where he's just going to go out there and just sling it and, get it to all of his weapons. I mean, Desmond Ridder, we saw it in the preseason games where he's throwing balls 8 feet over Pitts' head. He's got a cut. I mean, some of these throws are so bad. If Heineke can just be better than that, I think it helps. I'm kind of more excited for the Falcons players around him than I am for Heineke himself. But I think Heineke certainly can be like a spot start this week.
Yeah, he's definitely a fun one. Mike, your thoughts on Heineke?
I agree. There should be more there for fantasy, at least. He's got to play well enough to stay in the role. They're in first place. So, it's very similar to what Washington's situation was. I mean, he started in the playoffs against Tampa a few years ago. So I echo what Adam said. I think dare I say it, Kyle Pitts is especially interesting in that group without London, and it's hard to really even name guys in the passing game after him. So maybe that's good for Pitts. Something someday hopefully will be good for him.
Yes, we really need that to happen. And I actually wrote about Heineke in my sleepers article. And yeah, it could be a Pitts day because he likes to push it downfield. Pitts getting downfield for a big one. You would love to see it. We have a defense question. And this is a New England defense that's been struggling at times, but at home this week in a game that they can win against a Washington team that just got rid of their two best pass rushers. So it could be like a weird game flow. Falcon defense going up against Jaren Hall, who's getting the spot start from Minnesota. Then you have the Chargers defense against Zach Wilson on Monday Night Football, or the New York Giants defense against AOC. And it's just such a good nickname for Aiden O'Connell to be AOC. You see these tweets and you probably have like political people reading them and being like, what are they talking about? And football people reading an AOC tweet and thinking that, they're talking about AOC, the quarterback. It's just amazing. So which defense would you go with, guys, on this one? This is a tricky one.
Don't overthink it. That would be the first thing I would say, because it's just all this is so hard to be right. It's so random, and especially when it comes to defense. So these are all good. Even the Raiders against the Giants in that same game at the end there on that list. But Sam Howell with the sacks, Belichick against a quarterback who gets sacked all the time. I'd be on the Patriots, I think.
Yeah, I don't think you want to overthink it, like you said. I mean, there's so many good options this week with the horrible quarterbacks, but New England's the one that sticks out to me because, again, you want in a lot of these leagues, right? You don't get any fantasy points unless you get a score from your defense. So what creates scores? It's havoc on the defensive line, and what is that? That's New England versus the Commanders with all the sacks he's getting, strip sacks, pick sixes, stuff like that. So I would go that route because a lot of these other games, like you get Zach Wilson, he's probably just going to hand the ball off to Breece Hall a bunch of times, and they're going to try to keep him out of trouble. So I like the New England defense.
Yeah, for me, I think it's the Giants defense or it's the New England defense. And I think that like starting the Raiders defense against the Giants could also be an interesting one. I know that there's optimism for Daniel Jones, but I think they'll be inspired with the coaching change. And Adam and Mike, you guys play high volume. So I said this yesterday in First Class Fantasy, and a couple people in the chat thought it was like a sicko comment. But I want to start Sam Howell, but I also want to have some New England defense rocking across multiple teams because I could see this game going any way. I could see Sam Howell like lighting them up, or I could see this being a Sam Howell. Belichick's like, this is like a Belichick game where he's able to watch and say, oh, you know what? That's a blitz Sam Howell will never be able to pick up. And it's 3 interceptions, 4 sacks. New England wins this game easily. I think there's a huge range of outcomes here. So Adam, I thought you could appreciate. Do you ever have action on both sides when you're dealing with your defenses?
Well, I think in a situation like this, I think it can be both. Like Howell can throw a pick six, get sacked 6 times, and have 400 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. Like it can be both in certain situations. So, and I think that could be one of them. I mean, Howell isn't good, but he's a top 8 fantasy quarterback on the season for that reason. So, yes, I totally get what you're saying.
Let's take another question from the chat. Half point PPR, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, or DJ Moore. First world problems. Pick one. That's a great way of putting it, Gary. The quarterback change in Minnesota with Jaren Hall, we don't really know what to expect, but difficult to bench Jordan Addison. Which way are you going here, Mike? Pick one of the 3.
Probably Flowers, but really tough. Yeah, you made the point on Addison. Addison's been so good.
Yeah.
Maybe job one in that passing game for Jaren Hall is to find Addison, but that could be Hawkinson. It could be a heavy run game. It's a gamble. It's a situation where you want to have these kind of options on a player like that. A lot of teams with Addison are not going to have a good plan B, but Flowers, after kind of a light game against Arizona, I like him at home against Seattle. That's a game that, both offenses are clicking. Baltimore's defense has been very good, but Seattle has horses. So I kind of like the idea of Flowers this week.
I like Flowers as well. It just feels like a Flowers game. I think that's going to be actually a very underrated game. It would probably be the 4th best game of the week if we had to rank them, but that'll be a very fun game nonetheless. Adam, your thoughts on which player you would pick of these 3?
Yeah, Flowers is the same. Seattle coming west. Seattle coming east. 29th team against fantasy receivers this season, so it's a beautiful matchup for him.
Guys, what are your expectations for Davante Adams? We saw a very, very frustrating game, to say the least. Josh McDaniels and the general manager were both like let out to pasture, and I think this was several weeks too late for McDaniel. Davante Adams saw extremely low usage in like 2 games recently. It's been a frustrating season for Davante Adams managers. I'm cautiously optimistic. We saw what Will Levis did for DeAndre Hopkins with a sort of tunnel vision for your alpha wide receiver. Do we see the same thing happening with Davante Adams this week? Adam, start with you.
I really hope so. And I certainly thought that the coach should have been fired, but a lot of that stuff last week wasn't necessarily his fault. I mean, he schemes Davante Adams wide open for 200 yards worth of touchdowns, and Garoppolo launches it over his head. Now you can blame the GM and the coach for having Garoppolo in there, but I do think this is going to be one of these situations. And I think I read that, the players will run through a wall for Antonio Pierce. I know that kind of sounds cliche, but you get a guy like Pierce, who's a former player. He's just going to kick the door into the OC's house. Like, listen, throw Davante Adams the freaking ball on every single play. So I think that this will be a big week for him, targets wise. Hopefully, obviously, the quarterback situation, can they get it to him consistently? But I think this could be a monster week for Adams, and hopefully going forward as well.
Your thoughts, Mike?
Yes, it's different. I agree. It's different from Minnesota, like where Addison is kind of like short-term concern. Maybe it's Joshua Dobbs next week, and you'd expect Addison to, and maybe Jefferson comes back, and there's the future is bright there. It's just I'd be careful this week in terms of Adams. Like, it's sort of the opposite for me this week. Like Adam laid out, I'm excited about him. Just like with the coaching change, I think we'll be hearing about tanking a lot with certain teams. The Raiders are now, this change at quarterback, coach, GM. We'll be looking at just how high of a pick they can get. They have passed on quarterback in the draft and done things like sign Garoppolo, but you'd think that this year they would actually get Wi-Fi and prepare for these drafts and do well and get to one of these quarterbacks. And, that is maybe a situation where late in the season, Adams goes away, like Derek Carr did last year when I think he had a contractual thing where if he got hurt, his money would be guaranteed, but they're just basically like, let's shake hands and you can start your winter vacation or whatever early. So down the line, I think it could be precarious with Adams, but maybe not. And short term, I'm excited about him.
I'm extremely excited about him. I think if you're in a trading league, it's a great time to go in and go try to make an offer and see if somebody has that fear. And I love your take on Antonio Pierce. Very, very cool. Take, Adam. The guy was the last head coaching job he had was Long Beach Poly, a California high school powerhouse. So it's kind of like, this is like a real opportunity. Sometimes we see these interim coaches do very well. I don't anticipate they're going to win a lot of games, but I think that he's at least, you're not going to see this train wreck, and you're going to see the right guys being featured. And the kid, Aiden O'Connell, he passed for a ton of yards at Purdue, and he looked good in the preseason. So it cannot get worse than what we saw with Jimmy Garoppolo and Brian Hoyer. I mean, what was that even? So, guys, let's take one question from the chat from Anthony. Are we starting Aiden O'Connell? Or you got to, guys, for the questions, you got to give Jaren Hall his props and write his name out. You can't write Minnesota quarterback, but we'll give you a break on that, Anthony. So Aiden O'Connell or Jaren Hall, 2 rookie quarterbacks. Which one are you going with? The quality of the offensive skill positions in Minnesota, or our dead cat bounce game for Davante Adams? Mike, which way would you lean in?
I would go Raiders. I would go O'Connell here. It's how do you know? Like, he at least has a start. It's the Giants. Like, there's potential with Adams, there's potential where he can put up a decent stat line for you. There's also that for Minnesota, but just what I've heard is more pessimism about his qualifications, Hall, than O'Connell. O'Connell was kind of a little bit of a preseason star. I'd go there.
Adam.
Yeah, same here. He's at home. And I think all the stuff that's going on with the Raiders, they're a complete disaster, and I think they're still favorites. That's how bad the Giants are. So it's like, at home, and it's in relying on Davante Adams having that, and Jacoby Myers too isn't bad either, and Josh Jacobs and all that stuff. So I think he has a good supporting cast and a better wide receiver one.
I'm going to go with Aiden O'Connell as well. I just have a fear that the Minnesota-Atlanta game is going to be like an Arthur Smith like dream game, like a 2017 game where it's a lot of running backs. I think we're actually going to see a lot more Alexander Mattison and Cam Akers than we'd really care to see. I think they're both going to get an outsized number of touches. So I'm going to go with Aiden O'Connell, a.k.a. AOC. Guys, here's the one question from the chat. Flex question. DK Metcalf coming off a very high targeted game. Rashee Rice in arguably the game of the year. With no offense to the Buffalo Miami game, that was the game of the year early, Mike. But now we're at a new time. So now KC Miami's the game of the year. Or Chuba Hubbard in half-point PPR. Which way are you going here? It's DK Metcalf for me. Which way are you going, Adam?
Man, I usually like to lean running back when I can, and Carolina can keep him the guy there, but it would kind of be more of like a panic play. But I like Rice this week, in a absolute shootout, fun game. Now I know the Kansas City defense secondary pass defense is better than we think it is. And so it might not be the big shootout that we want it to be, but I'm hoping for that shootout. I'm hoping to be able to watch that. Rice could have he had 9 fantasy points this week, could have had a monster week, drops a ball over the middle. He's wide open. He could still be running after that drop. So I think I want to go Rice here.
I'm Metcalf. I respect that. I mean, that could certainly be the right answer. And Hubbard, it didn't go so well that I want to assume he's just like their number one running back now, and there's nothing more to say about it. Metcalf, 14 targets last week. He's close to like a big day. So I wouldn't want to bench him.
Yeah, it's Metcalf. You can't go away from that sort of target volume, especially in a huge game against Baltimore where they might have to pass a little bit more than they would like. Question from the chat, half-point PPR. Start one here. Roschon Johnson, who's been disappointing with this big split backfield, and Bajan as the quarterback. Rashad Bateman, who has been extremely disappointing for drafters, but has shown some signs of life. Or Michael Wilson, who we're excited for, but when Kyler Murray gets back. This is a very difficult one. Let's start out with Adam.
Yeah, I would go, man, I love Bateman so much, but I'm going to go Roschon, just hoping that they flip the switch this week. Maybe they're easing Roschon back in. I'm waiting for that Roschon game. I'm hoping he didn't lose his chance. So I'm going to go Roschon here.
I'm Roschon as well. Mike, your thoughts?
Me too. Yeah, Downs if he plays, but I would say the same. The other two receivers are just too risky.
Yeah.
Guys, one wide receiver that's been absolutely a huge breath of fresh air, a guy drafted in that money zone, a beat-up asset during the draft season, is Michael Pittman. Your overall thoughts on how Pittman's looked this year? I mean, to me, the guy's a locked-in wide receiver one. There's a chance he hits 190 targets this year. And if Josh Downs misses, I think you're looking at maybe a 15-target game this week. Adam, your general thoughts on Michael Pittman, how you view him going forward?
Yeah, I got to be honest. I don't have a lot of Michael Pittman. Wish I had more, obviously. I was on Richardson as the quarterback there, but I thought Richardson could get there without passing, and he was, but he also had the passing involved too. So, yeah, Pittman I think is great moving forward. You have a quarterback there that is just a guy that we can trust to just get the ball to the weapons that need to get the ball in Gardner Minshew. So I really like Pittman. Pittman's kind of like a lower ADOT over the middle guy, which works great for like Minshew and what he likes to do and his arm strength and all that. 28% target share on a team that could win the division. They've got a good stable of backs, so we'll see there. But no, I definitely like Pittman moving forward.
Mike, anything to add on Michael Pittman?
Not really. The Colts games I've heard have more plays on average than any other team's games this year. The defense is bad, and you can get into situations where, as you're seeing with Indianapolis, where the scoreboard gets lit up. That New Orleans example last week, there were 39-38 with Cleveland. Some strange things are happening in Indianapolis games. So yeah, he's in a great spot.
We love it. Big shout out to the defensive coordinator in Indianapolis. Keep it going, man. It's helping out our fantasy teams. Here's a question in the chat. Tank Dell or Demario Douglas rest of season? This is a difficult one. I think I am still, despite my love of Demario Douglas, I think I'm going with my previous love of Tank Dell. I think Tank Dell has a big bounce back week this week. Last week was just a terrible game flow in the Carolina-Houston game. I think this week will be a lot better. Your thoughts on Tank Dell versus Douglas, Adam?
I think I'm going to go Douglas here. I want to bet on the kind of the unknown. I mean, he's looked good so far in what he's done, and if he can get that role on a team that has a really good schedule, down the fourth best remaining schedule. I know they do have a bye week left, but Washington defense, Indy defense, like you said, Chargers in the middle there, Denver, Pittsburgh. So I think they can be the Patriots can throw on some teams. Now, I'm not necessarily sure that they really want to, but I think if he can get the shares of the guys that are out hurt now, I think he can certainly produce.
Mike, your thoughts?
I would keep Dell. I mean, that's been very promising. Douglas is okay, but I'd rather have the Houston offense than New England. I didn't know the schedule point. It's interesting, but I would not want to be dropping Tank Dell. Figure out another way to get Douglas on your team.
It's a ceiling versus floor scenario too, and you've seen the big ceiling games out of Dell. I think the argument for Douglas is going to be a guy that I'm going to be able to go get 11, 12 points from, but I don't know if he has that ceiling. I trust CJ Stroud so much more than I trust Mac Jones, although Mac Jones has a really, really fun matchup this week against a Washington defense that's just gotten shredded by opposing quarterbacks. Guys, we have a team that's been really frustrating for fantasy managers is the Green Bay Packers. If everything being equal, which Packers can you trust at this point, if any? Start with you, Mike.
Yeah, it's a bad scene. I was betting on Jordan Love to succeed. I thought the organization sort of deserved some benefit of the doubt that with his being their first round pick, years of prep behind the scenes, my logic was they were never taking Aaron Rodgers out for Love. So it didn't mean anything to me that he hadn't really gotten a chance yet. And they did nothing really behind him. So I thought all the arrows were pointing up on him, but just too erratic so far to give anybody in that offense much fantasy value. A.J. Dillon just does not look good. There's not much efficiency there. And you don't know if Aaron Jones is even healthy. Like they haven't even given him the roll back that we're used to from Aaron Jones. I do want to have Jones on my bench if I can, because I do think, maybe his injury has held him back and they've just got nothing to lean on to this point. So you'd think they'd want to get there with Jones against a Rams team that's beatable this week. Maybe this is the week for that, but Dobbs' touchdowns are saving him. Watson, just no real consistency there yet. The tight end is interesting, but just not a lot of, production. It's not great.
It's a really big mess too, Mike and Adam. I think you'll appreciate this because they're all purgatory guys. They're guys that we cannot cut, but we really can't trust in our lineups. So they're guys to prevent us from churning the waiver wire as well. It's hard to get away from a Romeo Doubs who's been saving himself with touchdowns. Jaden Reed has shown enough promise that you're happy to have him, but you can't really put him in there. And then Christian Watson gets 8 targets last week. When Christian Watson caught the touchdown against Detroit, I thought, hey, this is going to start really going in his favor, but it's just not there. And then the backfield is like A.J. Dillon you want to drop, but he's right there, rosterable. And then Aaron Jones, you can't get rid of him either. Adam, your thoughts? Anybody to trust on this Green Bay offense? Anybody you'd want in your lineup this week against Los Angeles?
That's tough because I think if you got Watson where you took him, if he's healthy, you're starting him, and the Rams defense has given up a ton to the receivers as well. He's QB. Love is QB 14 on the season because all the injuries and stuff. He still hasn't necessarily killed you. He has not looked good, but he's a young quarterback in terms of starts in the NFL. Loses Christian Watson early in the year, loses Aaron Jones early in the year, and it's just like A.J. Dillon stinks. The rest of the receivers are meh. So I do want to kind of give him a little bit of something, but no, I'm not looking to start Love or any of these guys. But Love could be a sneaky start this week with all of the, the 5 or 6 quarterbacks you kind of have at the bottom of the list here.
Let's test your Aaron Jones enthusiasm. Aaron Jones or Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders?
Robinson, probably. they've cut into him a little bit too with Washington, but he's their number one. And goal line stuff, I think I would play Robinson. He's like sort of a classic floor kind of play. And Jones, I don't know what he's dealing with, the offense and everything we just went over. So I'd go Robinson.
Adam.
I think I would lean Jones just because it scares me, like, because when if they decide to kind of give him the roll back, like, I don't want to miss it. And I don't think Robinson, with his lack of pass catching, is going to absolutely make me regret it. So, like, I think I want to be there when Aaron Jones gets his 13 carries and his 6 catches and goes for 150 and a score. So I would lean Jones.
Now, a lot of times during this time of the year with injuries, bye weeks, we're a lot of times we're having a dumpster dive for some of our starts. One guy that's a little bit interesting, I'm not going to waste your time on a Keontae Ingram question because we're not going to be excited to have to use him if DeMercado misses. We're not excited to use DeMercado. But one situation I think we can kind of squint and get excited about, relatively speaking, is Devin Singletary if Dameon Pierce misses. I have a lot of Singletary. Dameon Pierce, I don't think is going to play this week. And Singletary has seen his 2 highest snap shares in the past 2 games. He went north of 50% in week 6. Last week was like 47% snap share. The targets have not been there in volume, but he's got like 2 a game. Do we have any hope for Devin Singletary if he gets the backfield, presumably to himself with a little bit of Mike Boone mixed in?
Right.
Mike, you start with Devin Singletary.
I have not been able to bring myself to go out and add Singletary to my teams. I still like Pierce more as a running back, but what matters is what they think. And they've obviously used 3 guys now. You mentioned Boone. That's probably right to include him at this point. So, it's sort of like other guys we've talked about, maybe Robinson too. If Pierce is injured, I would never want to play Singletary if Pierce isn't if he is active, right? But if he's not, you've got a guy that's probably looking at 20 touches maybe in the game against Tampa. So that shouldn't be too terrible.
Adam, your thoughts on Singletary?
Yeah, I have so many teams that were like hero RB or zero RB with the bye weeks this week and the injuries. Kyron Williams isn't back. HN. I'm like squinting at Boone here. I'm like, man, can Boone get 12 touches in this game? Can he be an RB3? Maybe. The Tampa Bay defense, when Vita Vea is there, is a really tough defense to run on. But yeah, no, I get the Singletary point. But if, like you said, if Singletary is going to get 15 touches, I think you kind of have to start him in certain situations where you've got the injuries and the bye weeks. But Boone might be like a Sunday morning pickup on a team or 2 of mine where I'd like, can you get me 9 points or something like that?
It's the Mike Boone corollary, Adam. If you pick him up and you leave him on your bench, if he's on your bench, he could get a 15-pointer.
Yeah.
But if he's in your lineup, he's going to get a 4-pointer. So tread lightly, my friend. Let's talk about some of these really, really good games this week. Okay, we got the Dallas Cowboys versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Who wins the game, and who is the fantasy MVP of the game this week? Mike, start with you.
Okay. Well, CD Lamb coming off a huge game last week. I'll go with Dallas on the road. Micah Parsons. Maybe they get Philadelphia here, and Lamb keeps it going. So I'll go that route.
Adam, your thoughts?
I'm gonna go Philly, and this is so chalk. I'm gonna go Philly, AJ Brown. I just think that he's a monster, obviously. And Dallas gets there on defense with their pass rush, and the Eagles line is really good. And Dallas lost their number 1 corner earlier in the year, so I just think it's gonna be Philly and AJ Brown.
So yesterday on First Class Fantasy with Dave Kluge and Billy Muzio, I said it's going to be Philly, and I think AJ Brown has a game, but if you recall last year, Devonta Smith had the monster game against Dallas with the 2 touchdowns. I think it's actually going to be a Devonta Smith 2-touchdown game again. I think he's going to be the difference maker. You're going to get another strong week from Devonta Smith as he kind of balances out the season. Let's stay with the big one, Mike. Buffalo, Cincinnati. Who wins the game? Who is the fantasy MVP of the game?
I'm not going against our Bills, so I'll say the Bills. They're only like a 2.5 point underdog at the Bengals. Really interesting. So for so many reasons, this game, what happened between these 2 teams last year and in the playoff game as well. How do they do it? I mean, Diggs, right? We're out here talking about Davis and Kincaid and everybody else on the team, but Diggs just continues to produce. I mean, definitely paying off a first-round draft pick in fantasy yet again. I'd go there.
Adam. Yeah, I go Bills and I go Josh Allen. I just think he's this reminds me of Kansas City a couple of years ago where he couldn't get over the hump, and then he went in there, he went crazy and beat them in Kansas City. I think every time he beats them, it's in Kansas City because they don't come here. But yeah, it's I think Allen's going to have a vintage Allen game running, throwing. They need it. They need it to win the game because this Cincy offense is going to probably light up this Bills defense.
I'm going to say that it's going to be a balanced Buffalo game, and you have a career high from Dalton Kincaid, 85 yards receiving, 7 catches, and a touchdown.
Yes.
Diggs also plays well, but it's Kincaid season, guys. That's the answer. And then let's go Miami, Kansas City. This is a 9:30 game. Everybody gets this. The great thing about this weekend, guys, is all 3 of these games are spaced out. You don't have to make a decision here. You're watching the 9:30 game, Miami, Kansas City. Who wins the game and who is the fantasy MVP? Let's start with Adam on this one.
Theo, I am so excited. Not that anybody cares about this. My son is finally done with football season. This is the first week I get to sit down all day and watch football. 9:30, if Bills game to cap off the night. So hopefully this Germany thing doesn't ruin the potential of this game with the time change and all that stuff. I'm gonna go Miami. And I'm going to go Tyreek Hill in a revenge game. He already told them they're going to get this smoke. Like, I just think he gets there. And I think Mike McDaniel's kind of into that type of thing with his players. So I think Tyreek Hill sees, 15 touches or targets or carries or whatever, the whole thing, and just goes nuts.
I'm on the flip side of you, not on your prediction, because I had the exact same prediction, but I rarely have to do anything early morning Sunday. But my daughter has a gymnastics tournament on Sunday. So it's 8:15, you get there and you're there until it's over. So I'm going to be watching this game in the condensed version, on the NFL app. I'll watch the half an hour version, but I'm going to be like the guy looking at my phone when my daughter's not out there. It's a tough putt, but you got to do what you got to do. Tyreek Hill revenge game. I think it's like, we'll look back in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years with Tyreek Hill being one of the better wide receivers to ever play the game and say, how could one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game, one of the best wide receivers to ever play the game, one of the best offensive minds to ever coach the game, how could this thing have gotten split up? It maybe cost, tons of wins and maybe a couple of Super Bowls, but Tyreek Hill is going to remind Kansas City about who he is. Miami lost to Buffalo. Miami lost to Philadelphia. This is their chance to get a big marquee win in Germany. I think they do it, and I think they do it by a touchdown. I don't think it's going to be a down-to-the-wire game. I think Miami's going to get this one done. Mike, your prediction for this game and the fantasy MVP?
I will pick Tyreek Hill as well, but I'll take the Chiefs to win. The Chiefs, after a loss where they scored 9 points, I don't like picking against them almost ever, and maybe, their defense has been so good, Kansas City, too. Like, that's the story of their season so far, if it's not Taylor Swift. So I will say, like, Pacheco, kind of like sort of that. I mean, I don't think they explode against Miami's defense. It's possible. It's possible. If that happens, you could be talking Kelsey or Rice, who we talked about earlier. But the Dolphins have to beat somebody good. They have yet to beat somebody good. So I'll take Kansas City.
I love it. You guys were extremely generous with your time and your takes. Highly recommend that you subscribe to the Deep End podcast. It's excellent. Mike, let everybody know where they can find your work, where they can find you on Twitter.
At Schopp Talk, SCHOPPTALK. You can listen to my weekday show and usually Bills postgame. We don't do the night games, but when they play Sunday afternoon with the Bulldog on the Odyssey app or at WGR550.com. And Adam and I are on together on the Player Profiler Network Tuesday nights, 8:30 Eastern, Deep End FF1.
Right here on Player Profiler YouTube, you can watch all of the shows, and you can also listen to it as a podcast. Adam, we'll let everybody know where they can find your work as well.
Yeah, I do a bunch of stuff over at Full Time Fantasy, from articles to podcasts with them. So you can find me there Wednesday nights at 8:30 at Full Time Fantasy on the YouTube channel there. also a podcast form as well. And then obviously with Mike, Tuesday nights, 8:30 at the Deep End.
And if you enjoyed these start-sit sort of questions and help, Billy Muzio and Bradley Stalder are doing the Dominator every Saturday night right here on Player Profiler YouTube. That is not a podcast. That's a YouTube-only show. Shout out to the chat. You guys were great today. Please smash the like button. Check out my episode of First Class Fantasy that Billy Muzio and I put out yesterday with Dave Kluge. That was a really, really fun one. And I just started out Dynasty Life, my solo Dynasty podcast. I had Ryan McDowell, who's one of the sharpest Dynasty minds there is in fantasy, as my first guest. And stick with us here at Press Coverage. We're going to do the best we can to help you win your league, to help you dominate your weeks, and to help you get that roster ready for the fantasy playoffs. Enjoy the week of football. It's the best Sunday of the year, best week of football for the entire season. We're going to get it. Have a great day, guys.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.